Are we good to get started? All right, we might just get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Very exciting to have Keith here. I thought I'd just briefly introduce him by asking a couple of questions, then I'll pray for us to begin, and Keith will go ahead. So Keith, would you mind just telling us what you currently do with your day-to-day life?
Sure. So with my wife, Sarah, we co-direct a mental health and pastoral care institute for a Christian women's organisation called Anglican Deaconess Ministries. So basically, we're just trying to support churches in their work. They were frontline work, caring for people, but we're just trying to provide resources and information and training.
Sounds wonderful. And do you have what's your sort of background of study and research? We have a lot of research students here.
Yeah, I've done a bit of study over the years.
Yeah.
So I studied psychology. I won't tell you when. That was a little while ago. And then I worked in child welfare for a while, then studied theology, worked in a couple of churches for 8 years, then in theological education at Moore College for nearly 20 years, and then this new job. So I've got, and along the way somewhere there, I ended up doing a PhD, which wasn't really my idea. But
whereabouts did you do that?
In this illustrious institution.
So you're with peers.
Yes, yes. So in history department.
Great. Well, I might pray for Keith and then we'll get started. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the source of all wisdom and knowledge. And yeah, in Jesus, we have the treasures not only of the mind, but also of the heart and soul. And we pray today that as Keith speaks to us, that you would give him wise words to enable us to discern how to live and work and research well in light of the minds that you have given us and the limited capacities that you have given us as well. And I pray that this symposium would be a great blessing, both to those who are attending here in person and those who catch up online. We pray this in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Did someone come in and look at an outline? You got one? All good. Excellent. Can I just say it's a great joy to be with you, great privilege and honour to speak to such a group as yourselves. And I'm sure you'll be aware mental health's on everybody's radar these days. And there are particular challenges around mental health for those in academic institutions and study. I won't go into detail about them, but there's certainly some challenges. So a great thing that you're thinking about this. And you see there, you'll find it helpful to follow the outlines, a fair bit of detail on that. And don't panic, I'll make sure we finish in time. But 3 things I want to try and look at. One is just to get some handle on what do we actually mean by mental health. So I think there's all sorts of ideas out there, but I've got a particular it's not my model, but I think this model is quite helpful. So we'll talk about mental health. Then we're going to talk a little bit about stress and how stress impacts mental health. And then thirdly, just going to quickly run through a few ideas, some sort of tips and practices that can help us manage stress well and maintain our well-being as human beings made by God. Okay, so that's where we're going. So let's start off. Number 1, understanding mental health and well-being. Lots of people see mental health on a continuum from severe mental illness down one end to really good mental health down the other. But I like to look at 2 continuums. So see this diagram? You'll see here on the horizontal axis, this is a mental ill health axis. So this is whether mental illness is present or not. And then there's also a vertical axis to do with well-being. Now, I just want you to think about your physical health for a moment. You can have days when you feel a bit run down and tired and might have a few muscle aches and things. That doesn't mean you've got a physical illness. And it's the same with our mental health. You can feel a bit blah. That doesn't mean you've got a mental health disorder. Okay? And what I want to say is difficult and negative feelings are not necessarily a significant problem. They can be very normal, appropriate responses to the challenges that we all face in life. Okay? And what I don't want to do is call everyday distress a mental health problem. And I think, unfortunately, some sections of our society today are leaning in that direction. Our negative emotional responses are often the right response. You know, if you experience a loss, we feel grief, and that's actually really healthy. God's given us these sorts of emotional reactions to process the stuff that happens in our life. And you'll know the fact that mental health's been on everybody's radar and everyone's talking about it, it means there's been interesting things have come from this. Some are very positive. The fact that we can talk about this stuff reduces stigma, and that means people are much more likely to go out and get help. Okay. But there is a downside. I think our language, you might have noticed this, I think our language has become much more medicalised. So someone feels sad, what do they say? I'm depressed. You feel worried about something, so I've got anxiety. You go through a difficult experience, I've had a trauma. Now, that may be the case, it may not be the case, but what this, I read this book by a UK psychologist, and she said, in her third year class, over 100 students, she asked one of the students, how do your peers talk about mental health? And this young woman said, 100% of the people in this class self-identify as either having depression, anxiety, or both. Okay. Not all of them clinically diagnosed, just that's the way they describe themselves. And the downside to this is everyday normal feelings of, you know, feeling a bit blah, suddenly get labelled as mental ill health or a mental illness. And this helps nobody because it gives us the wrong idea about life, that, you know, life in this is a broken, fallen world. Sometimes things are really hard and we feel that. And it also means that those who do have a significant problem sometimes just get overlooked because there's too much other noise. Now, what I really like about this diagram, if you look there, you see those sectors. Up the top, it talks about flourishing. And there are people who can be diagnosed with a mental health disorder, but can still be flourishing in life because their condition's really well managed and they have built into their life the sort of practices that feed our well-being. So I've got a friend, she's got bipolar, excellent medical care, takes some medications, and she's very active and involved in the industry. Okay. On the other hand, if you look down the bottom, these are the languishing sectors, and there are people who don't have any diagnosed condition, but the way they live their life is not helping their well-being. So if, for example, no one would be in this category, of course, but if, for example, you stayed up late every night, play lots of video games, computer games, only ate junk food, never got any exercise, didn't go outside very much, those things are not good for us. God has not made us to live life that way. Okay. So the positive part of the diagram, that term flourishing, what's this about? Well, that's good mental health, good well-being, sorry. And that doesn't mean you just feel on top of the world all the time. What it means is you can function well in life. You have relationships that are nurturing. You nurture others, they nurture you. You feel okay about yourself. You can be productive, get through the things that you want to do. You're resilient. You've got a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. All of these sorts of things, that's the flourishing life, the life of well-being. But it's a really significant thing I want to say here. Good mental health involves the ability to have positive experiences even in the midst of challenging life circumstances. Okay? So what lots of people think is, if my circumstances are bad, my mental health will be poor. And this is just not true. Because our experience of life and how we feel is much more determined by our mindset. And our mindset gets shaped by the things that we pay attention to. Okay. Any of you heard of a Christian pastor in the States, a guy called John Mark Comer? You've heard of him? Okay, the ruthless elimination of hurry. He says, I quote, "What you give your attention to is the person you become." And this is because of the way God has made our minds, our brains to work. You've heard of neuroplasticity. Our neural pathways, they're formed and strengthened by the things that we give our attention to and the things that we practice. So that's what happens when you learn to ride a bike or drive a car, play a musical instrument. These things become almost automatic, don't they? And it's the same with a whole lot of other habits in our lives. The more you do stuff, the stronger the neural pathway becomes around that. So I've got a question for you. Has anyone noticed a tree today? Anyone noticed a tree? Yeah? Can you tell us about your tree?
It helps us looking to buy plant at Bunnings today.
Okay. Off to Bunnings. A particular tree?
Oxfine.
Okay.
Yeah. But also there's a lovely tree out just in the main entrance to Woody, and I was having a nap on the bench under it.
And you were looking at the tree. Do you know what sort of tree it is?
No.
Okay. Nice tree. Someone else has noticed a tree.
Well, I would be doing as a case, so I'm very excited to come in and see how the new lady goes from that.
Okay. Oh, lovely. How lovely. Okay. Fantastic. Now I'm a bit obsessed with trees. Okay. So true confession. I had my tree of the day. I'm always on the lookout for a good tree. So I got off at a bus stop early, came in from the city, because I thought, I'm a few minutes early. I'll just walk up through the big park and up the side here. There was a lovely tree on the edge of the big park just before the uni, and the leaves are turning on top. I don't know what sort of tree it is either, but they're turning brown, or gold, that sort of colour, and it's very lovely. I'm not sure whether it's going to win tree of the day, but very nice tree. Okay, now why am I carrying on about trees? Well, lots of people don't notice trees. Do you know why they don't notice trees? One reason is this thing. So I see people walking through beautiful parks full of beautiful trees, and all they're doing is staring at them. The other reason people don't notice the trees is what's going on in here. And lots of people in their headspace are caught up in what's called negative ruminating thoughts that run through their head. And consequently, that creates all sorts of difficulties for them. Now, I'm going to come back, talk about this a little bit later, but I just want to say now that when it comes to what we give our attention to, Christian faith is profoundly significant. Because when we dwell on the truths we find in God's word, how much He loves us and is committed to our well-being and how He walks alongside us in life. When these sorts of truths fill our mind, they shape our neural pathways and they calm us. They can have a really significant effect. They won't take away a serious depression or our feelings of grief, but they do us a lot of good. Okay. So what's really important, when just going back to the diagram for a moment, this vertical continuum, we can do a lot to move up, okay, to increase our sense of well-being. Depending on how we choose to live our life, the sorts of things, the choices we make, the sorts of things we choose to give our attention to can make a really big difference. And we'll come back to that later. Okay, so that's that vertical dimension. What about the horizontal? All I really want to say here is, how do you know when you've slipped into that state of mental ill health or a mental illness, and when there's a serious problem? And here are the three things that lead to a diagnosis being made. The first one is there is significant distress. I'm not talking about everyday distress, but something really significant. How do you know it's really significant? Normally by the second factor. impairment. So suddenly you cannot do life the way you normally do life. So you're struggling in your studies to complete stuff, in your work, in your relationships, in day-to-day living, okay? And then the third thing, persisting over time. So we're not talking about feeling down for a few days. We're talking about something that's continuing for a number of weeks. All right. Okay, so that's mental health, not just about having a disorder. There's also this thing called well-being, which we all have at various levels, and we can change it. Okay, second point, stress and mental health. Now, some people you might have heard it said, well, stress is all in the mind. No, it's not. It's in our bodies, because our stress response is a bodily response that God has given to us. And it's actually a really good thing. It's very normal. And when people talk about stress in their life, often they're talking about distress, okay? Or chronic stress, which we'll come to in just a moment. Now, you might think that it's coffee that gets you going in the morning, right? But it's not. It's stress. Your body has a stress response that gets you out of bed and gets you going and doing your research or whatever else is that you're involved in. And a certain amount of stress is actually really, really good for us. It gets us going. I ask you, how do you go when you've got a deadline to meet? Some people, that's crippling, but for most of us, a deadline is actually quite motivating. A little bit of stress, we function better. There's actually an inverse relationship between stress and performance. Not enough stress, we're bored and uninterested, we don't do much. Too much stress, we're anxious and worried, that performance drops off, but just the right amount. It's like Goldilocks, okay? The right amount of stress does us a lot of good. And you see here, the stress response is one part of what's called the autonomic nervous system in our bodies, which has these two arms to it, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the accelerator. This is the stress response, okay, that gets us going. You've heard of fight and flight. This is the autonomic system, nervous system doing its thing. And then on the other side is the parasympathetic. That's like the brake that calms us. It's also called the rest and digest. And the parasympathetic is activated when we're in a relaxed state. And you know, you're eating your lunch, and your body will say, oh, I need to digest that food now. So I just think I'll have a little sleep. I'll just sort of calm myself down. That's why you feel that way after lunch, okay? The thing about sympathetic and parasympathetic, they work a little bit like a seesaw, like this. When one is turned up, the other is turned down. And again, God's designed our bodies with this rhythm. Work, rest, stress, calm, activity, recovery. That is very, very important. Come back to that. Okay, what activates the stress response? Well, it's called a stressor. Okay, stressor. And stressors come in two types. There's external stuff that happens to us from our outside world, whether that's a work pressure, a study deadline, having to give a paper, write a paper, a relationship difficulty, financial problem, whole lot of stuff, okay, can activate the stress response externally. But we also have internal stressors, and these are attitudes in our head, ways of thinking, thoughts that we hold, and these are different for all of us. I'll give you a little example. Those of you who are doing a piece of higher research work at the moment, this never happens, of course, but if your supervisor was to say, this is not good enough, you need to redo it. How do you feel? How do you feel in response to criticism? Some of us find that very difficult. Okay, we don't like criticism. I don't like criticism. Others of us, oh yeah, didn't do much work on that, deserve to be called out, water off a duck's back. Okay, different mental framework, different emotional stress response. Okay. So the bottom line is the amount of stress that you experience is not just caused by external stuff. A lot of it, the mindset. Okay, what's going on up here? The other thing about stress is absolutely essential for our survival. Doesn't just lift our performance, it actually keeps us alive. So, the human brain's incredible, can do all sorts of things. I don't know what you're doing in the research, but, people make microchips and build bridges and write romantic poetry, these extraordinary things the human brain can do. But the number one job of the human brain is to keep us alive. Okay, to keep us alive. So that fight response has been around for thousands of years. It's what enabled someone, a nomadic tribe member, to either, faced with a saber-toothed tiger, you either fight it or you run away. Trouble is, nowadays, we can be sitting in a chair, looking at a computer, and have the same hormones and chemicals racing through our minds and our bodies as someone who is trying to fight a saber-toothed tiger. That's what's happening nowadays. And the human brain is so sophisticated, not only can we react to what's happening in our immediate surroundings, but we can actually anticipate stressors, problems in the future, which may not even eventuate. I brought a little friend with me today. I'm just going to leave for a moment, get my little friend. My friend, this is Ziggy, the soft toy. Okay, I want you to imagine Ziggy out there in Africa on the plains of the savannah, eating her lunch. And she hears a rustle in the bushes. What does she do? What do you think Ziggy will do? Ziggy will take off. Why? Because even though it means she has to take a break from her lunch, she doesn't want to become lunch for a lion. 99 times out of 100, probably the rustle in the branches is just the little animal or the wind. But she doesn't wait around to find out. She clues that. That's the way her brain works. Let me tell you what I don't think Ziggy does. I don't think Ziggy worries about whether she's going to confront a lion tomorrow. I can't be sure, never been inside a zebra's head, but that's my guess. Okay, we can know. Because our brains are that sophisticated. And lots of us get caught in the headspace where we either anticipate a problem in the future, will I finish my PhD? Will I get the right results? Will I get really sick? Will someone I love get really sick? Will I get a parking ticket? You name it, all sorts of things that we can get right there. Okay, so that's stress. That's the stress response. Now, let me talk to you about chronic stress. Because while God has wired our bodies to have this stress response, and that's really healthy, it's designed for the short term. But what happens for lots of us is the foot gets stuck on the accelerator and we don't get the recovery time that we need, and our bodies do not cope well with this. So I want you to imagine you're standing in a swimming pool, okay? In the swimming pool, the stress level is the water level. Now, if your baseline stress level, let's just say it's down here around your knees, and then you're hit by a bit of a wave of stress, something really difficult happens to you, and so the water washes up and it might come up to your waist. So that's okay. You'll do all right. But what happens if your baseline stress level is here? And then you're hit by something unexpected that really knocks you around. Well, you feel like you're drowned. Okay? Lots of people live their life like this. No margin, no opportunity to properly recover. And so they do get knocked around by stuff. Living with chronic stress is very uncomfortable. And normally we find ways to try and manage that. Lots of people, what they do is they might just shut down, stay in bed, try and avoid. Other people turn to what you might call soft addictions. They binge eat, they binge Netflix, they binge shopping online, or more severe things. Things like they turn to alcohol, pornography, gambling, stuff like that. Okay. Look at this little quote from a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett. Over time, anything that contributes to chronic stress can gradually eat away at your brain and cause illness to your body. And what it does, it changes everything. It changes the way insulin works in your body, the way blood flows through your system. It changes the way your brain works. Okay, it affects your neurotransmitters in your brain. And that's why there is a link between chronic stress and anxiety and depression and burnout. How do you know if you're experiencing chronic stress? Well, here's a few really common signs. You find it harder to sleep. You might have trouble getting to sleep at night, or you might wake up during the night. Okay, that's one. Your emotions are more fragile. So you feel a bit more anxious, on edge, more irritable, more teary. You know, you cry during the ads. Not that I watch many ads. I watch the ABC, but you're hypersensitive to comments from others. You find it hard to concentrate and be productive. And then, of course, there's other bodily stuff like muscle tension, headaches, digestive problems. Okay. Let me just say something briefly about burnout. Okay, because burnout is one of those things that happens in the academic environment. The great researcher here is a woman called Elizabeth Maslach, and she came up with 3 key symptoms of burnout. You see there, emotional exhaustion, you know, you've got no energy, you're at the end of your tether, just worn out. Depersonalization, you see this particularly people working in the helping professions, where suddenly a very empathic person loses their empathy and become hard and cynical. And then thirdly, lack of accomplishment. You just feel ineffective and unproductive. Now, what's interesting is Gordon Parker, who set up the Black Dog Institute, and a couple of other women working with him, they've done some what's called the Sydney studies, some new research on burnout. And they've come up with a few really interesting things I'd like to share with you. One is 2 new symptoms they came up with in their studies. One is social withdrawal. So even the extroverted person backs off. They can't cope with people. And then secondly, cognitive impairment. You have trouble thinking clearly, concentrating, staying focused or remembering. That's really great in the academic world, isn't it? This is very important. A key risk factor for burnout is your personality type. Particular personalities are much more prone to burnout. The key factor is perfectionism. Now, I know no one working or studying in higher education ever is perfectionistic. Okay. Very interesting. Need to be alert to that. Psychologists talk about the big 5 personality factors. One of them is a thing called neuroticism, because that sounds bad. Sometimes gets renamed as emotional stability. But people who are naturally more anxious, self-conscious, have low self-esteem, who are highly reactive to stress, are much more prone to burnout. So are people, another one of the big 5 is conscientiousness, people who are competent, self-disciplined, motivated to achieve, also more prone to burnout. And people who are concerned what others think of them and who don't feel like they've got much control over the events in their life, they're also much more prone to burnout. Okay, now I've just described myself to you. I'm very alert to these things, and I'm careful. And the sort of practices I'm going to mention in a minute, I build these things into my life because I don't want to end up with it. Okay, so just worth being alert to that. Is burnout the same as depression? This is the other thing that they study, and they found no, these are 2 different things. And they say burnout is primarily a stress response due to chronic stress. And that's why they find it not just in the workplace, where it's traditionally associated with. You also find burnout in people who are carers, might be looking after a family member or something like that. And what they found with burnout is people don't have the same pervasive sense of sadness and low self-esteem that you find in depression. So here's a little quote that captures this. I'm not sad as such, I just feel exhausted and can't make myself care about things such as work, which I don't see as important anymore. My cup is empty. The good thing is you can recover from burnout. Normally, you've got to remove yourself from the situation that's burning you out, but there are steps to take. And can I just say, anything I've said raises alarm bells for you. I really encourage you to go and see your GP and get things checked out. Okay, okay. Now, quickly, managing stress and maintaining well-being. Let me just run 7 ideas by you, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for some questions, if you've got some questions. Here's 7 tips. 1, allow your body and mind to recover from the demands of life. Okay, so the stress response, if it's meant to be short-term, let it be short-term, not long-term. We all need periods of rest to wind down, to allow the level in the swimming pool to go back down. Okay, it takes a bit of time. So things like holidays are really good. A day off where you don't do any work. Even short breaks, 90 seconds. Looking out the window, noticing the trees. Stuff like that. Calms our minds. Okay, just really can make a huge difference, and they allow that sympathetic nervous system to kick in. Slow breathing. When we're feeling worried, we tend to breathe in a very shallow manner from the upper part of the lungs. But that slow breathing from the diaphragm down here activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calming effect. So that's why lots of people with anxiety conditions get taught breathing techniques. Relaxation techniques, I won't go into details. There's all sorts of things out there that you can find out. If you've had a really stressful day, one thing that some people find helpful is to have a, what's it called? A goodbye shower. Go home, you wash off the muck of the day, put it behind you. If you're doing work from home, study from home, going for a walk around the block, create some sort of barrier between your work and your normal stuff like that. Okay, that's really helpful. Number 2, but can I just say, we've got to give our bodies the chance to recover. Because as I said, that's God's rhythm to life, work, rest. Number 2, treat your body the way it's designed to work best. If our stress response is in our bodies, when we treat our bodies well, again, that will help manage the impact. And so there's what we call the trinity of good physical health: exercise, sleep, good nutrition. And again, I won't go into details. You know all of this stuff. If you're feeling really stressed, if you run up and down in the spot for a few minutes, that actually gets some of those stress hormones straight out of your system. Okay? Again, calming effect. And just moving our bodies helps heal our minds. So getting regular, so nearly every day, some moderate, intense exercise, a half an hour to an hour, game changer in our lives. Okay, and try and cut down on the amount of time spent just sitting. They say sitting is the new smoking. Sleep, God's gift to renew us. Most of us need 7 to 9 hours sleep a night. If you get consistently less than 6 hours sleep, that has very serious health consequences. You are much more likely to die earlier, and a whole range of other physical health conditions. So do you have good sleep hygiene? And if you don't, there's the sort of things: winding down before bed, having a bedtime routine, staying off the screens with the blue light that affects our melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that makes us sleepy. it really helps to get up at the same time every morning. Okay, even on the weekends, on non-work days. Nutrition, I don't need to tell you about that. You know the deal, sort of things probably your mother said to you. Basically, they say, just try and eat food that hasn't been interfered with a lot by human beings. And you'll do okay. All right. Number 3, healthy mindset. I've already spoken about mindset, but this really can be a game changer. Just trying to reframe circumstances, think about circumstances in a different way. And again, from a Christian perspective, what is the fact that God is in control can reshape your understanding of a particular difficulty you're facing, perhaps in your studies or in something else in your life. Even our mindset around stress can be a game changer. So when you're not stressed about being stressed, you'll experience less stress, if that makes any sense. Okay. And what can really help actually is just writing things down. When you write things down, what it tends to do is engage our thinking and higher order processing, not just our emotional fear pathways in our brain. So just doing that, and you've got this little thing there about catastrophizing, a little exercise. If you're a natural catastrophizer, that might be helpful for you. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4, pay attention to the good and beautiful things around you, like trees. Yes. What's interesting about this one is shifting mindset can be quite hard to do. Right now, psychologists can work with people to help them do that, but to do it on your own sometimes can be difficult. But this is something that we can all do, and it helps us get out of those negative thought patterns. Lots of us have that chatter sort of going on in our brains. How do we get out of it? Well, a lot of that chatter looks back to the past with regret or looks forward to the future with worry. But when you focus in the moment, that has a much calmer effect upon our thinking and calms that stress response. I'll tell you about a little experiment that was done in Harvard back in 2010. When did the smartphone come out? Trivia question. 2007? 2007. So 2010, hadn't been around for very long. These researchers, they conducted this experiment. They got a whole bunch of people, I haven't got the number here. A whole bunch of people. They, at random periods in the day, they sent them, they pinged them and asked them a question. They said, okay, what are you thinking about? How are you feeling? What they found was 47% of the time, people's minds were wandering either to the past or to the future. And they weren't actually in the moment of their experience. And they found that those people whose minds were wandering actually felt worse than those people whose minds were in the moment. So when they wrote up their research paper, they called it, "A wandering mind is an unhappy mind." How's that? So when we focus on the information that's coming in through our senses and pay attention to that, that really can have a significant calming effect. So let me ask you, what can you hear at the moment? Air conditioning, playing. That's bad, isn't it? As soon as you're focusing on what you're hearing, your mind is nowhere else, is it? And this can be a real game changer for people. Now, okay, you know about the trees, not just the trees. There's flowers. There's twilight. Do you like twilight? The light shifts, beautiful. You know what we often do? We just don't notice them. And, you can't notice the devil all the time. You might have other responsibilities on your plate. You can't constantly be in the moment. And in fact, all of that talk about mindfulness that you hear around the traps, I think it can be overplayed. Yes, we are meaning-making creatures. God has made us that way, and we need to think about our past and our future, but not in a way where we're constantly living in the world of regret and the world of worry. That's not the way God wants us to construct the narrative of our lives, a narrative that's actually built around his work within us, which changes our regrets and gives shape to not having to worry about the future, doesn't it? Okay, so let's be attentive and open to the beautiful little blessings that God gives us each day. Okay, number 5, take a break from digital devices. Okay, so you've got a phone with you. What am I told you right now? I want you to turn it off. How do you feel? Good, good. Not everyone feels good. Some people are very anxious about it. You know about social media? So some people can handle social media really well. There's a significant proportion of people, particularly a proportion of younger women, for whom social media has a very adverse impact. So you need to be aware of that for yourself and the impact it's having on you, and having some boundaries around digital devices. So again, good sleep hygiene, good digital hygiene. Can you turn notifications off? Is this the first thing you look at in the morning, the last thing you look at it? Can you make some changes there? And basically, the bottom line here is your brain needs a break. Okay, and these things are not helping that in the modern, in our current world. And for lots of us, we're actually caught up in, I can't remember the name of the person who came up with this term, continuous partial attention. And can I say, if you're a Christian believer, that gets in the way of our calling to love God and to love our neighbour. And to love our neighbour means being present and involved and attentive. And these things get in the way of that. Okay, number 6, connect with others. This is, again, is a real game changer. The only reason the human species survive is because we're social. Can you imagine back in prehistoric times, if you got separated from the tribe, what would happen? You're cactus. You're not going to survive. Now, has anyone heard of the Harvard study of adult development? Okay, this is the longest running longitudinal human research project in history. It started in 1938, and yeah, very interesting study. They've the current directors, these 2 guys, they published this book recently. It's called The Good Life and How to Live It. Forget, that's not the best way to describe it. Lessons from the world's longest study on happiness. Basically, if you could boil down, one of the things they say at the start of this book is most people are very bad at, people are terrible at knowing what is good for them. Interesting. But if you could boil down the results of this study into one sentence, it would be this: good relationships keep us healthier and happier. So if you can make one choice to help your well-being, it would be make sure you have warm, connected relationships with other people. And there's no surprises here for us Christian believers who know at the heart of the universe is a God who exists in warm, loving relationship and tells us how important relationships are. But the way we relate is very important. Again, another quote there from Lisa Feldman Barrett. The best thing for your nervous system is another human. The worst thing for your nervous system is another human. So, yeah. Can I just say that I reckon our church communities can be a real game changer here. The way that we relate, setting up networks of relationships, accepting, being inviting, welcoming to people can make a huge difference. And I just want to say is what the founders, it's really interesting. The things that make us tougher, that make us more resilient, increase our well-being, are the tender traits. So things like kindness and compassion and forgiveness are really, really good for us. Whereas people who hold grudges, they find that tears people down and increases stress level. So again, the pattern of relationships you find in the New Testament is a picture of human well-being. Okay, last one. Remind yourself that you are known and loved by God. I read this really interesting article by a Christian psychologist, and she said that when you bring your concerns to God in prayer, you are entering the most emotionally safe space in the universe. Because what's our God like? We're into a place where we are fully known and fully loved. All the junk in our life, all the stuff we don't want other people to know about, we feel guilty and ashamed about, we come into the presence of God and that stuff, it's gone. And it's taken away. And God loves us. Why does God love you? He loves you because he loves you. Simple as that. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing. That's a freeing thing. That's true freedom. And it's a game changer. No matter where you're at, what you've done, how you're going in a Christian life, how poorly you're doing in your Christian life, God's face always turned towards you with love and kindness and compassion. I love that. That calms my soul. It calms my mind. A great thing to help us amidst the stresses and storms of life. Okay, I do get a bit carried away, so there's only a couple of minutes for questions. But if anyone has any questions, really happy to try and answer them.
We've still got a couple of minutes, but if you do need to run off, feel free. But I probably have time for one or two questions. So just maybe speak it loudly for the live stream.
So you're talking about at the start about how things like things that will worry aren't necessarily bad things, and that kind of good responses. And then you're talking about illness and mental well-being. Is like that sadness and worry, is that an example of low mental well-being? Or is that something else?
It can be, but it may not be. And so what I'm trying to do is, I think a lot of our discourse in society generally now is, some of it is not helpful, particularly for younger people. I think I just think we're sending the wrong messages. So what I'm going to say is, life is often very hard, and we're going to experience what is called, negative emotions like sadness, and there will be things that concern us that raise our level of worry. Sometimes that is entirely appropriate. And I think the way God has designed us is to have these emotional responses. And when we actually allow ourselves to have them, that is a way of actually processing this material. And so when I have a strong emotional reaction to something, I try and allow myself to have that, not try and push it away and not try and catastrophize about it. But I also know that over time it will calm. So I won't go into any details, but some fairly difficult things came our way a few years back. I'm very gutted by some of these experiences. And but I knew over time that would settle, that would calm. So sometimes I think we just need to allow ourselves to do that. But at other times, sometimes we get stuck, that worrying thought, we can't get it out of our head. It starts to wear that rut in our brain. And that's when sometimes we need some help. And when you are down low on that mental well-being scale, the vertical dimension, that is actually a risk factor for mental ill health. So it can push us into anxiety and into depression if we are not building into our life these sorts of practices that lift our level of well-being. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's like appropriate
I found it really helpful because the way that I learned to evaluate my emotions and people's emotions around me is to consider whether it's rational or irrational. And I wonder if that kind of evaluation is helpful or whether that's.
Okay, so the question is, should we evaluate our emotional responses? Are rational emotional responses appropriate and irrational not appropriate? I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because our emotions, they just are, in a sense. Okay, so we have these responses. I suppose when I talk about appropriate, what I'm concerned about is, okay, we've got to acknowledge the given of our body. They are bodily responses, so sometimes we don't have a lot of control over them. They are connected with our thinking. That's why Scripture can command certain emotional responses, like being joyful. But sometimes we have the emotional response. We need to acknowledge it, and then we need to perhaps do some evaluation and thinking about it. And then when we can bring the rational part of our brain into play, and that can help us work out what should I actually do with this feeling that I've got right now. And, you know, do I run with it? Do I try and reframe it on my thought processes? Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky. I think it's a bit complicated, but what I do want to acknowledge is if something's there, it's there. So let's start from that place, and then we can think more about the evaluation. And should I be trying to do something about this, or do I just wait and let it pass over in time? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
Yes, just a little thank you from us.
Thank you very much.
Very kind of you to give up this hour coming in. And yeah, I for one have learnt a lot and just want to share that recording with many people who couldn't make it, and also go back over the notes. So thank you. I think it's been really helpful. Yeah, feel free to stick around and ask any questions, but otherwise,
yeah.
Thanks for coming.